Okay, so we're just going to start the video just like this today. No intro, just for the sake of time and efficiency. I figured this would be a really good way to start this video because I have a lot of stuff I got to get done today. So we're going to run straight into it. And if you catch this video within the first couple hours of me uploading it, I might be live on Twitch, which you can find a link to in the description. And you guys can pop on over there and we'll be reacting to all the videos that creators had uploaded on Friday that they actually had real gameplay footage. If you don't have time to, or you want to look at some of them, you can also check my Twitch VODs where you can just find me reacting to all of them, or you can look at the official City Skylines playlist, which I'll also put down in the description. I definitely suggest checking out City Planner Plays and Martin's videos. I think that they're both wildly different, but also there's a lot of stuff in both of those that you kind of learn some tips and tricks or like some things that you didn't even know about the game. So I definitely suggest checking out those two specifically. Now let's get into the very last dev diary on cinematic camera and photo mode. I am super excited for this. I am giddy. As somebody who has a lot of experience doing real life video production, after watching through the video the first time, I'm really excited for this camera, and I'm really excited to see what other people are able to do with it. So anyways, without further ado, let's dive into it.
Modesty is a virtue, and it's totally overrated. Unveil the beauty of your city with the revamped photo mode in City Skylines II. It's powerful, dynamic, and user-friendly. So there's almost no limit to how creative you can be when capturing the magnificence of your city and sharing it for all the world to see and celebrate.
Since this is the last dev diary, there's some things I kind of want to like talk about in terms of the dev diary, specifically how much they focused on $2.20 City. They absolutely loved New Dollar Tint. Of all the cities that they had like creators pre-make, they adore, you could tell they just love how $2.20 made this city. So kudos to them.
With one click of the photo mode button.
So this is the first look we've really had at photo mode aside from Rudy Remcamel's Cities in the Sky video. This is just the photo mode. There's like some stuff hidden behind the YouTube play bar, but I digress. I don't know what the right button is, which is under settings. Under closed captions here, we have a toggle and hide UI because you can turn it on and off. And then there is the photo mode on the left. So you can just click it and it'll take a photo of whatever you're looking at. So they would just take a photo like this and they'll actually do that. So we also have the time of day and simulation speed buttons right here. So you can actually change the time of day. When you're filming video, you can change how fast the game is running, which is cool.
You can access two image capture modes, free camera and cinematic. So
this right here is a keyframe graph. We will talk about this in greater depth in a little bit, but just know that you're going to, if you've ever opened a video editing software before, that's not like Movie Maker, you've probably seen this or maybe watched a tutorial that's had this. If you haven't, I will try my best to explain it to you in the most basic way possible. If you are familiar with video editing softwares, if you are familiar with video production, camera stuff, I'm not going to explain things the correct way because I want people to understand it enough to be able to use it, not confuse the crap out of them. So I'm going to explain it in a really basic, simple way so that way people can understand it so they can use these tools to create the shots that they actually want, right? Like you might have a vision for a shot and I want to at least set you up or like give you something that you can come back to like look at and be like, oh, that's what this does. Oh, that's how I do that, right? So I really want to make sure that I'm explaining it in more of layman's terms rather than like exacts.
Use free camera mode to take eye-popping stills. Toggle to cinematic mode to unleash the filmmaker inside. So
you can see right here that they've created a keyframe right here. It's this little white dot, super small. I know it might be hard to see, but at this position, you'll see them move forward now, and then they'll create another one. So they dragged the marker down here, as you can see. So let's go back for a couple frames here so you guys can actually see it's below the timeline indicator. We'll just click back. Actually, it'll be easier. So you can see it's down here on the left, and that's where they created the frame. And then they clicked it and dragged it over here and then moved the camera.
There are all kinds of camera property
and then they set another key. So what they're able to do now is drag these keys around or make changes on these keys, and each one is a set point. So everything from one point to the next will transition to the next thing. So let's say they had time of day go from, it's at 8 right now, right? Let's say they had it go from 0 to 8 in 30 seconds. it'll slowly take that from midnight, I would assume, right, to 8 a.m. over 30-second span, right? That's what that does. And you can make, if this is advanced as I think it is, you can probably make adjustments to like how smooth that is or how easy that comes in. That's called an easy ease. I don't know if that's actually in here. That might be a little too advanced for you guys, but just to let you know that there might be like a little bit more options in terms of what you can do with those. However, they also added motion to that, right? So they could have done time of day keyframes, but they didn't. They did a motion. So what they did was the horizontal x-axis, and they went forward, which there's two horizontal axes, there's X and Z, and then vertical is Y, so it's up and down. And they set it at one position, they set it at another, and they added keyframes. And that allows you to make motion in this software. Well, it's not software, it's internal, but they're going to hit play. It doesn't actually work, and then we're going to go to the next one.
After.
Okay. So this next one is photo mode. And this is where all of the big boy settings are at. So just be prepared. There's going to be a lot of information in here, but I promise you it's going to help you. If you don't know what any of this stuff is, if you've never done any kind of photography or anything like that, this is going to help you immensely when you go to use this tool, okay? So I've recorded this part of the video twice now, and I keep recording it because I want you guys to like kind of understand it, but it not to get too complex, because as I've stated many times before, this is what I do for a living. It is my profession to be a video production person. And so I kind of get carried away when explaining a lot of the stuff related to this. So I want to try to explain it in the most efficient way possible that makes the most sense, okay? That's like nice, easy, and concise. So this is hopefully the last time I'll be recording it. Here we go. So the first thing here in the photo mode, this is the actual camera setting part of the photo mode. Right here we have the sensor type. Now your camera is broken up into a bunch of different parts, and one of those parts is the sensor. It's the actual part where light comes into the camera. You can make a preset from what I can see here because they have a 65mm Alexa preset. Now, I'm saying this kind of quiet so mine doesn't go off upstairs. This is made by a company called Airy. If you watched the Barbie movie recently, if you watched the new Batman, if you watched Wednesday on Netflix, if you watched Joker, these are all shot on a 65mm Alexa. So this is a real-life image sensor that they're trying to emulate. Now, what the image sensor does is when light comes into your camera, hits the image sensor, that's what it uses to create the image digitally, right? Because these are digital cameras. They're not real film cameras, right? We don't use real film cameras really anymore. It's very rare. So that light comes through, hits it, turns it into a photo. So the image sensor size can also make adjustments. Now, there's a sensor type. So this is what would be referred to as the camera body. And so you can adjust the camera body here. Now, there might be different presets. Maybe there'll be mods to add different types of camera sensor bodies, right? But for right now, there's probably going to be some options. Just pick whatever one you think looks best. It's really not that important to like pick and choose which one, because you should just kind of pick the one that you think looks the best for what kind of shot that you're trying to do. The next few options right here, we're going to have ISO, shutter speed. We'll go over those in a minute. I found a really nice graphic, and it's actually the reason why I'm reshooting this. That kind of explains how ISO, shutter speed, focal length, and there'll be another setting called Aperture, like Aperture from Aperture Labs, from Portal. You will recognize what an Aperture looks like because it's the logo of Aperture Labs. We'll go over those in a minute. But next we have Gate Fit. I honestly don't know what Gate Fit is. Gonna be completely honest with you, never heard of it, don't know what it is. If you know what it is, let me know down in the comments. We're gonna skip over it for right now. You have camera collision, so that way if you're dragging the camera around, moving it around, it can collide with buildings or anything else you want it to collide with. So there's that.
Including adjustments to the camera body.
So focal length is something we'll go over here in a minute. Next, we have lens shift. I don't know what lens shift is. I think it's just moving where the lens is at, and then you'll start to get black bars on the sides. I don't know why you would use this. I think that's what it's for. Could be wrong because I don't have access to this stuff, but that's how I'm taking it. Next, you have aperture, which I said that we're not going to talk about right now. There's aperture shape. I have no idea what that would do to your video. I know that when we go to talk about aperture, your aperture is kind of like a bunch of like things that kind of poke out of a round piece. You'll see in a second, but there's different blades that kind of come out for it, and apparently you can change the blade count. I don't know what that does.
Camera lens and aperture shape.
Yeah, I have no idea how to what that would actually do to your image quality. I have no idea. And then the last part down here is barrel clipping. My assumption with barrel clipping is when you look at a camera lens, sometimes you'll put a sunshade on the end of it or something else, or like maybe you'll be shooting on like a fisheye lens that's like super wide, and you'll get a black ring around your photo. It's not a vignette, which you might have heard of, which is kind of like this blur you put on the edge to make people focus in on the center. From my understanding, barrel clipping is when the actual ring of the lens is so far out that it creates a harsh black ring around your shot, right? Literally makes it round, basically. That's how I understand barrel clipping. I could be wrong. I don't actually think I know what barrel clipping is, but that's my assumption on what it is. I don't know what anamorphism is. Again, if you know what that is, let me know in the comments. And then roll, I believe, is when you roll the camera, right? It's like you actually like spin it, right? Do a barrel roll. Okay, so we're gonna go through two different websites right now. This one's from SLR Lounge, and they have this really nice infographic right here that explains kind of how all of these features work, and I think this is the best way to explain it. So when I was in college, there was a bunch of different ways to affect different aspects of your camera, and these are kind of the three primary things that you can do to affect brightness on your camera. And these were really important because depending on how you wanted to frame your shot, you had to give certain things to one of these three and then take away from others. So if you're shooting with ISO, for example, so we'll start with ISO. ISO is a digital way to brighten your footage, essentially, so like your camera. It allows the image sensor to artificially brighten the footage, essentially. However, it causes a lot of distortion. And as you can see here in this picture, you'll start to see these little dots pop up. So you want to keep this number as low as possible to keep as clear of a picture as possible, basically. So the golden rule in video production when I was in college, this might have changed, just based on newer image sensors and stuff like that, was never to go over 1600. And some people would even say never go over 1200 or 800. So that's kind of the golden rule for creating this distortion. It will create a grain. It's not like the nice film grain that you're thinking of. It is like a very ugly looking grain. If this is your last resort to add brightness to your footage, increasing the ISO will help increase the brightness of it. The next is shutter speed right here. And your camera has a shutter. It opens and closes based on having the image sensor exposed to the light, right? As we talked about earlier, there was an image sensor. That's what the shutter does. So the shutter speed is how quickly and how long that image sensor is going to be exposed to light. So a fast shutter speed like 1/1000 is really fast. So that'll go boop, and you'll hear the camera go tsk, right? And if you've ever heard a camera go tsk, tsk, like really long, that's probably a slower shutter speed, right? Like 1/8, 1/4, something like that. And what that can do is add more light because you're allowing it to be open longer, but because the image sensor is open longer, you start to get motion blur on your footage, or on your photo, you can get something called car light trails. And there's probably an actual name for this. I don't actually know what it is, but I've always called it light trails. This is how you take these shots. If you've ever seen nighttime shots where like the cars leave all these like really cool trails, that's because they have a really slow shutter speed, because at night you need to leave that image sensor open longer in order to get enough light to create the image. And that's how these are created, because car lights are so bright that when the car drives past, the car's moving fast enough to not get picked up by the image sensor because it's so dark out, it can't ever clearly grab the car, but the car lights are bright enough to grab the car lights as it drives through, and that's how you create these lights. So in theory, we should be able to do that in City Skylines 2 just with the shutter speed setting. There's a golden rule in video production where you want the shutter speed to be double the frame rate. Now, I don't know if that's going to be relevant in the video game because it's a video game. We don't know what your frame rate's going to be in game. But the golden rule is to usually put this at double your frame rate. So if you're filming for TV, for example, TV is shot at 30 FPS, you would want to put it at 1/60. And that's just kind of the golden rule, because it makes it, if you put it too high, motion looks really weird. I don't know how to explain it. I don't have a clip to show you guys, but let's just say it looks really weird if you put it too high for video compared to the frame rate. And if you put it too low, you'll start to get really crappy looking motion blur, and it just doesn't look good. So that's how shutter speed works. So I would just probably suggest setting it at 1/60 or whatever it's stock at, maybe don't touch it unless you want to try to mess around with those car light leaks. The last thing is Aperture. And Aperture is this ring. If you've ever looked at the Aperture Science logo, or we can just take a look at what real life apertures look like. This is another really good image of what they look like. As you can see here, there's a bunch of these shades that kind of pop down. And this is what the shade count kind of adjusts. And there's also like a setting with curves. I have no idea how that would affect the image, or why that would affect the image more than having it not. But essentially what this does is it opens and closes it. And when you open and close it, it allows for more light to come in or less light to come in at the image sensor. So for the shutter speed, it's the amount of time it's exposed to, and the aperture affects how much during that time actually gets to come through and hit the image sensor. What that does is when your aperture is small, it creates a really wide depth of field. So sports footage, for example, is usually shot at a smaller aperture, so that way they don't have to focus. They can just set it. It has a really wide set for the field, right? You can see a lot. You don't get that shallow background. Whereas if you let it open really wide, you get that shallow background. So like, for example, you can't, like, my background is a little blurry and I have a pretty low aperture on mine. These are called f-stops, for example. Also for ISO, if you might have seen this in decibels, so dB, sometimes this is in dB. So if that helps click something in your brain, that way you know it. Sometimes ISO is referred to as decibels, just so you know, just like in audio. It's different though. But aperture, for example, I have a really low aperture. I think mine's at f4, for example. So I will create a somewhat blurry background. You can't see what's in focus back over here necessarily. Like if I had text back over there, you wouldn't be able to see it, right? And as I drift into the background, I start to lose focus. And that's because of my f-stop. And so that's how that feature works. And I would assume that's how that's going to work on the camera in the game. And then if you had a smaller f-stop, you won't get as much light in the camera, so you might have to make up with it in ISO, but you'll be able to get a much shallower depth of field footage or picture, and you'll be able to see more of your city. Whereas in this one, if you want to just focus on one thing in your city and make everything behind it blurry, you can do that by increasing the size of your aperture. And the higher the number is actually the smaller the aperture. It's like opposite, right? This leads me to one last thing, and that was the focal length. It was the one thing we didn't touch on, and this is actually from Nikon, which is a camera company, their website. Right here is a really good example of focal length. So focal length is the distance, the image distance here. This is your real focal length. So it is the distance from your lens to the image sensor. When you hear somebody say, like, I have a blank millimeter lens, right? I have an 85 millimeter lens, right? Compared to an 18 millimeter lens, that actually means that the size, it's kind of like the size of your lens, right? So like I'm shooting on a 20 millimeter lens. It's a pancake lens. It's really flat. It's thin, okay? And then this right here is a variable focus lens. So I can change this one. Right now it's at 14 millimeter, which is technically smaller than my pancake lens, which is really tiny. But that's because this lens has a zoom function. And as you see me spread it out, right? Now it's up to 140 and the lens gets longer, and that's because the distance between the lens and the sensor now is farther apart. Now, if we go back to the picture here, you can kind of see what that does to the image, whereas the 18 millimeter is a really wide shot, and as we get going into higher numbers, up to the 300 millimeter, it's really close up. So this is basically how you zoom, right? This is how you will zoom probably in this tool. There will not be a zoom setting. You will just adjust the millimeter, and this is usually how zooming is done in most stuff. But there's some other things that are changed when you adjust your millimeter. So your shot will become wider, right? It'll actually change how things are perceived. Depth, trees might be positioned in different spots as you zoom in. And much like this aperture setting right here, the further you zoom in, so the bigger this number is, the 300 millimeter, in real life, the shallower the depth of field will be. So this is like a 300 millimeter, and this is like a 20 millimeter. That's a really good way to describe it. Now, I don't know if that's how that's going to work in this game, but that's how it works in real life. So hopefully all that information isn't too much, and it helps you guys kind of understand how to use this tool, because I don't see a lot of basic settings in this tool. I see a lot of advanced settings, and there is some more basic settings in the next section, which we'll look at. Again, I'm recording this after, like while I'm editing, because I realized I just went way too long-winded. And this next area will have like a bit more simple ways to do all this stuff, but that's functionally how all this stuff works. And I want you guys to understand how cool it is that we have all these real camera settings built into the game's photo mode, which is not something you see in a ton of games. I mean, I know a lot of games have photo and camera modes, but they're not this intense, which leads me to believe like we're going to see some insane stuff from creators down the road, which I am so excited for them to kind of get into this, understand how it works, and oh gosh, I'm just so excited. Anyways, I don't know where I'm going to cut this back into, but we'll cut back in now. Actually, I take it back. We're going to look at them dragging the focal length. So the focal length defines the distance between the sensor and the camera lens, which we've talked about before. This determines the vertical field of view. Smaller focal lengths result in a larger field of view and vice versa. So it's basically just zoom. It's the FOV. It zooms you in, pulls you out, right? So right here, we'll see them zoom.
More. For example,
right?
With camera collision or focal length.
And that's how that works. So
fine-tune the depth of...
anyways, I'm going to cut back into when I talk about this section now. So right here, we have a bunch of different options for depth of field. And so manual option, I assume, is all the things I just explained to you in actually being able to create the shot that you want. Now, because this is a video game, they have the luxury of making that camera not function like it does in real life, okay? In doing that, you can just go through these settings and change all of that stuff, right? Like you can change where the first part of your in focus shot is and the end part of where the focus in the shot is. And the really cool thing is you can keyframe all of that. So if you want that to move with the camera and like change where that's at, you can do that with all of these settings. Like I can't begin to explain to you guys how cool and excited I am to how cool this is and how excited I am to like mess around with this. Wow, yeah, this is just so sick, and it's all built into the game. But anyways, the manual mode is like probably working with the lens, and then you could probably, I'm sorry. The manual mode is like you messing around with these settings, and then unchecked is like working with the lens is what I meant, sorry. But anyways, yeah, you can like change where the blur, oh gosh, I'm just so excited.
Fine-tune the depth.
Motion blur, you can add motion blur to your camera as well, which is something that will happen with your shutter and all that stuff. So you can automatic that. Bloom is brightness, basically.
The field.
And then vignette is probably something you maybe dealt with in other video games, but it's the edge of the shot kind of having like a little bit of a black faded ring around the outside to kind of help your eyes focus more on the center of the shot.
Motion blur, bloom, vignette.
So you can kind of see it got a little darker on the edges.
Grain and panini.
And now you can see it really aggressive.
Projection with settings on the lens tab.
And you can change where that is so you can make it look like eyes are kind of looking around, you know? That, I mean, just all the cool ideas. I'm just like, so excited to see like what people like Canadian Moose plays. Loves to do these little like cinematics in the beginning of some of his builds, and I'm just so excited to see what kind of creative things he comes up with and like what everyone else comes up. I'm so excited for this cinematic camera. You guys have no idea what kind of content people could like come up with just based on the fact that we have such a more advanced camera.
Mad on the color tab.
So this is the color tab. This is photo. Technically, this is where all of the brightness and color options are. So before this was all of the camera stuff, the first tab. The second tab is all of the manual adjustments. So if you don't want things working the way they would in real life, you would go into the second tab, which is the camera tab, and manually adjust those things how you want them and like kind of break some rules, I guess, basically. But you would put the things that we talked about in the first tab and what they do to camera lenses, but you could just manually adjust all that. And then this one is all going to be on brightness and color. So we have post exposure, which is, I would assume, just changing the exposure of your camera. So exposure is in reference to how long the camera is exposed to light. And you can do this in post when you're touching up photos as well by bumping up the exposure, which will increase the brightness artificially. It's usually not something you want to do. You'd rather shoot it right the first time. So just know that it might have some negative drawbacks to the photo quality if you adjust that setting. Contrast just helps elevate differences in color and light. So for example, you'll see them right here if we go back.
The lens tab.
So you look at the way the shot looks right now, okay? It's a little bit flatter on these reds right here. And just look at the brightness. The brightness isn't that bright, but as they adjust the contrast, you'll see the sky. I saw the sky, especially this building, especially brightened up. You'll see these browns kind of really come out on this building, and the side of the building got a lot darker as well. It might not be super apparent to you, might be dependent on your screen that you're using as well, but I promise you it's doing all of those things, and that's what contrast does.
You can transform.
Saturation just saturates the photo, so it will increase or decrease the amount of color basically that's in the shot.
The vibe of your screenshots.
So they rip out the saturation, they floor it basically. So now it's a black and white photo. And if you were to run that the other direction, it would become very vibrant. It won't look good if you pull it all the way, but unless you're shooting on a LUT, but that's not something that you guys need to know. Oops.
White balance and brightness. Whatever you do.
So white balance is something that cameras have to do. Again, a lot of this stuff might go over your guys' head, and I'm sorry if this is all boring to you, but, you know, that's what this deep dive into these dev diaries are. I'm trying to explain to you how this works because we're trying to break it all down. So the next thing is white balance. And white balance is what you should do every time you use a professional video production camera like this. You basically take a white sheet of paper. I mean, this is a prosumer camera, so it's like something that like normal people would buy, not like a professional one like the Arri that we were talking about earlier. But essentially what you would do, take a sheet of paper. There's always a white balance button on your camera, and you'd hit white balance, okay? That puts the colors of your photo at true color. It takes that white, it knows what true white is, and it automatically gets the camera to be the correct color palette. Now, again, if you're shooting on a LUT, which is something that you guys don't know about, that will be kind of different and you'll still have to go in and adjust. But if you're just shooting normally, that's how you get white. Now, because that doesn't exist, you can't just put a white sheet of paper in here, and there might not be something white in your map aside from the CRI thing down here at the bottom. You'll have to probably manually adjust that white balance. And so this just allows you to adjust probably two options. And this is usually like how white balance is done in like photo editing softwares, where you can adjust the temperature and the tint. I was starting to explain it, and then I think I decided to probably go against that. And this is how temperature and tint work. So temperature is color temperature. So when you buy a light bulb, you might buy a light bulb that kind of has a yellower tint to it. And there's actually some evidence to support that yellower light bulbs actually like are better for you. They make you happier. Reminds your brain of like fire and stuff like that. So over here, we actually have like a pretty good example of color temperature. This is all stuff you don't need to know in terms of the Kelvin rating. But if you're like professional like me, you kind of like understand what this is. Daylight is usually anywhere between like 7,000 and 5,000 right in here, like evening. The golden hour that people talk about in photography is kind of down over here. It's warmer. You think of like senior class photos if you're here in America. I don't know if they do that in Europe, but you know, you have all this stuff. Incandescent light bulbs are lower on the spectrum. So when you add temperature to your photo, you're either making it bluer or yellower, and it changes the color temperature, which is what we call it professionally, of the light. And that's one way you white balance things. The other way is adjusting how much pink or green are in the shot. And right here you can see that sunset has we lean a little bit more on the pinker side of things, right? So temperature and tint over here, and over here we can see what they actually look like. So if you want to tint it more towards the green, you can pull it to the right. If you want to tint it more towards the pink, you can pull it to the left. And that's what tint does. And then you can also see that's what temperature does. And that's how you create a perfectly white balanced photo. Now, since there's no automatic settings, now you guys just know what each one of those does. And right down here, we have the brightness settings, and that's going to be shadows, probably midtones, and then highlights. These are just very conventional photo editing software options. So if you ever messed around with photo touch-up at all, even on your phone, you probably have seen these options before. So just know that's what those are. And you can also adjust a raw color tint up here as well in this option, which is very interesting. So you can actually set a specific tint if you want the whole photo to kind of have like a copper look to it or something like that. You could put that over it and then like make it look like it's a Western or something like that by applying this tint to it.
Whatever you do.
And then over here we have the environmental settings. So you can see that this is like the scroll bar right here is super tiny, which means that there is a ton of options in the environment settings. And when we have all these options in the environment settings, that gives me a lot of questions. It gives me a lot of questions because something they didn't answer in the dev diary is when you run the photo mode in the simulation, right? Because you're running the simulation while you're in the photo mode and you can make all these choices and options. Does that affect the simulation or does it just revert back? And when you're playing the game in photo mode, is the simulation still running in the background? How is it making these simulations? Will it just roll back? It's something they didn't answer, and it's something I'm really curious about. Because like, if I want to mess around in the photo mode for a while, is my city gonna run rampant and fall apart while I'm in the photo mode, or is it like doing its own separate simulation? That's something I'm really curious about. But we can see all these different options in here for the environments. We have attenuation distance. I don't know. This is all for fog, so I'm assuming that's like the distance the fog is away from stuff. I think they begin to slide this stuff around and we'll be able to see it. But base height of the fog, maximum height of the fog, maximum fog distance, tint, volumetric fog albedo, volumetric fog distance, volumetric fog anisotropy. I don't really know what a lot of those settings are, but we can mess around with it.
Don't wait around for ideal weather.
We got a little highlight of what attenuation. I'm not even going to bother. Controls the density at the base of the fog and determines how far you can see through the fog in meters. At this distance, the fog looks absorbed and scattered out 63% of the background light. Oh, really interesting.
For ideal weather conditions.
I hope that all of the options have settings like that. So as you can see, they pulled away the fog. You can still see it way out here, but it kind of like makes that ocean kind of have that morning fog kind of vibe. Like, oh, there might be a storm coming, or it's like a cool morning.
To take your shot.
Or you can pull that fog in, which is super cool.
City in sunshine.
Woo! And now they did like a cut. And now we're in the atmosphere settings. So this is the Aurora Borealis, and we can make some changes to the Aurora and how intense it is. Maximum air altitude, air density in different colors, the air tint. So you can actually add another tint to it in here. Maximum aerosol altitude. I wish we could see all these settings. Aerosol density and aerosol tint. I'm going to be messing around with this so much.
Brought under the shadow of stormy skies. Set the distance clouds.
So let's see. They look like they show off a ton more settings here.
Set the distance.
So right here we have distance clouds. So that's the distance of the clouds, right? Opacity, altitude, tint, exposure, rotation, density, cumulus cloud opacity, stratus cloud opacity, and cirrus clouds opacity. And we also have the wispy clouds opacity. So these are all real types of clouds. Sorry if my voice almost gave out.
Distance cloud.
So then as we scroll down here, we also have the volumetric clouds, density, shape factor, shape scale, shape offset.
Volumetric cloud.
There's a bunch of different options in terms of the what looks to be different offsets, so you can like make adjustments to like how they're positioned and stuff like that. You can get really fine-tuned in this stuff. We have erosion, altitude range. These are all like just different ways to adjust how the clouds are positioned and how they look, which is super cool. Sunlight dimmer. There's a sunlight dimmer, so you can adjust the sunlight and how intense it is. Scattering tint, bunch of scattering options, and then we go back to the fog. So. And then here's the atmosphere options, which we already looked at. So, wow.
Settings on the environment tab work in a similar way.
We already looked at the time of day.
Change the time of day and set the simulation speed, which is useful when creating videos in cinematic mode. Ready to roll camera? You'll find basic controls for the cinematic camera when you enter cinematic mode. Use them to calibrate.
All right, so notice how they moved the camera around, right? And they're setting these keys at specific points. So they went to 15 seconds, they set a key, they started at a key, and now they moved it, and now they're going to move all the keys again, and they positioned it.
Camera, and all those other cool camera properties.
And now you can see how it actually motions the camera. Now, I have no idea how harsh it goes from each keyframe. It's something I'm really interested to see, because in like video production softwares that I use, you'll have like the options to adjust intensity and curves. And I saw in Imperator's video that they were doing that. So I'm very interested to see how all those settings work and how similar they are to maybe things like Adobe products.
Camera position controls, which control the position and rotation of the camera, and all those other cool camera properties.
And so every single one of those settings that we had enabled, you can keyframe, or key as they're calling it. So if you wanted it to start at daytime here, be nighttime here, daytime again, add some fog on the last one, you can have it slowly transition to fog across the whole thing, or you can set the a separate fog keyframe to be 0 here, so you can have it 0, 0, full fog, you know, or like you can keyframe anything basically. So you can adjust the focal plane as you're doing everything. Like everything is keyable. So you can make all those fine-tune adjustments as we go between each second, which is super cool.
Like play and pause to view the playback you created. Save for when.
So this is really cool, the fact that you can actually save presets. Now I know you can do that in the cinematic camera mod for City Skylines 1. But in City Skylines 2 here, it seems like you can just save cinematic sequences. I'm sure it probably just creates a file on your computer, so maybe you could export it and send it to somebody. I don't know, which would be weird because you're like in like a different city, so I don't know how that would work. You'd have to adjust all the keyframes. But essentially what this will allow you to do is do a shot, right? Like let's say you wanted like a zoom out of your city, and you could do the zoom out of your city, and then you can build in your city for like an hour. And you can go back and take another shot, do the zoom out again. And then in another hour, you can do another zoom out. And that allows you to create a time lapse functionally of your city. Now, it's not going to do a real time lapse because you're going to have to go back and do it over and over and over again. But you'll be able to see a before and after of your city with the same shot. And that's how they've made a lot of the shots in this video series that they've done for the Dev Diaries, is if you've noticed, they have like a wide sweeping shot, and then it'll like halfway through, it'll like through the shot, it'll transition and you'll see a bunch of buildings built. That's how they do that.
When you want to keep that playback, and reset when you want to start fresh. Wait, hang on. A playback? A playback is a set of points spaced throughout the timeline of your video.
If you notice right here, it looks like they set some keyframes for the vertical part of this, and you can start to see the vertical and the horizontal also like have separate lines now. So we have a blue line and a green line now, and you can actually see the differences between them.
Typically, each point has a different camera position and rotation. The video comes together as the camera transitions between them. And as you add points to the timeline with different camera positions and rotations, you can also tweak the transition between them. When you're happy with your playback.
What's really cool with this, and they don't show it off very well, is I'm pretty sure there is separate keyframes. I know for a fact there's separate keyframes for all of the different lines here. So I wish they could have shown all of the keyframes that they had, but I bet you if you made this green line the primary focus and you could see the key lines or the keys on the green lines, I bet you there'd be one right here. There might be one right here to where the intensity starts to go down, and there'd be another one. So they don't even need to line up. You can just make the keyframes wherever you want for all of the shots to be completely different. Like they don't have to line up. You can have so much control. Like, this is why I've been so excited for this Dev Diary. And I know that some of you guys might be like, this one's boring or whatever. You may probably not even watching anymore. But this is the thing that has made me the most excited.
And as you add points to the timeline with different camera positions and rotations, you can also tweak the transition between them. When you're happy with your playback, record it using any game capture software.
So let's hear that again.
When you're happy with your playback, record it using any game capture software.
So this is just a reminder that there will not be an internal recorder for this stuff. So you will need to use an external program like OBS, like NVIDIA GeForce overlay, or like AMD's, whatever they have built into your graphics cards. You will have to find a way to record it externally, except for the pictures. As far as I understand it, the pictures will still be like taken and saved somewhere, I think. So
that's exactly how we've created this series of feature highlights videos.
Which is so cool.
The best part? You can then share your videos with a global community of city builders who share your passion for testing the limits of what's possible.
Make free content and promote our game, just like I do.
Your city is unlike any other because it's yours.
Sick.
So go on. Show off a little.
That's how they end the last Dev Diary. I think that was so cool to show like how they made all the Dev Diaries at the very end. It's like, hey, then we also have this thing built in that like you can do so much with it. So I'm sure that was really long. I might end up cutting this down and re-recording parts of it because I think I went on tangents at some point, but I might just upload it full, like wholesale, because I'm really excited for this one. I know a lot of you guys might not be. There's also the written portion, so we're going to move into that right now. Okay, and this is about the halfway point in the video. Let's be honest, it's a little bit more than a halfway point in the video at this point. Where I usually like to shout out my Discord subs. So I just want to give a huge shout out to J1519RKP and Wheatbread for supporting me, as well as my other patron. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. If you guys want to shout out in any of my videos, you guys can subscribe in the Discord, which is actually the best way to financially support me. There's lots of cool benefits you get, especially on my Twitch stream, which again, find in the description down below. And if you head on over there, you guys can check out some of my VODs or just find me when I'm live, because we're going to be reacting to all of the new City Skylines videos that were released last Friday. There's like 50 something of them, so we're trying to get through all of them. I think we've maybe gotten through 10 at this point. So yeah, pop on through. Anyways, back to the video. Okay, so here we are in the written portion of the dev diary. Again, I go through and I highlight the parts that I think are important. There's a large section right here that I think is kind of important to touch on, and it just kind of like reaffirms a lot of the stuff. And we get to see a little bit more stuff about the actual graphs and stuff in the dev diary, which is really cool. So anyways, we'll start off up here with the cinematic camera and free camera modes are completely different from what you're familiar with in City Skylines, which obviously they're very complex now. The differences between them is truly night and day. As we scroll down, the very first options tab you will discover is the camera, from which you can change all kinds of settings related to the camera itself. Examples of these include the camera body, which was the 65 millimeter setting that we saw in the sensor type, the camera lens, the aperture shape, all of which have subsettings allowing you to tweak things like camera collision or focal length to get the exact shot you want. And again, you don't have to touch any of those settings. Like you really have so much flexibility in this camera. Like, it is complex, and eventually once I get my hands on it, I'm going to do a full tutorial on how to use all of the settings in this. So if you're like still confused by this dev diary, don't worry. Once I get my hands on the game, I would absolutely love to make a tutorial on how all of these camera functions work. Like, I will make this my thing. Like, I'm just so excited that we have all these options now. But again, we will do a tutorial if any of this stuff is confusing at some point, so where you can actually see what it does. From the lens tab, you can adjust depth of field, motion blur, bloom, vignette, film grain, and panini projection settings. So something they talked about in the video that I tried to gloss over was the panini projection settings in the video. So the panini projection is essentially, the easiest way to explain it is kind of like FOV, but when you take like a really old skateboarding video, right? If you ever watched one where they have that huge fisheye lens and it really messes up like the edges and it'll really warp them out. What panini projection will do is it'll allow you to kind of bend that back in and make it look more normal and flatter. That's like the easiest way to kind of explain it. So that's what panini projection is. If you guys see that, if you guys see this as a setting, that's what that one is. Next, we have color. As the tab name suggests, you can make all kinds of changes to the color in screenshot, bringing different vibes to it. The options in the color tab include color adjustments, white balance, and brightness. And of course, you can balance their individual settings. So you can adjust all the individual settings. So to brew the perfect storm, we have the ability to adjust weather. From this tab, you can change the distance clouds, volumetric clouds, fog, and atmosphere. And so lots of settings, obviously. So the next is environmental tab, which allows you to change the time of day and set the simulation speed. You can only set the simulation speed in video, which is used in the cinematic camera, a feature that we will go over next. So let's go over that. Cinematic mode, which consists of general tools at the top, 2 graphs allowing you to tweak camera position controls and camera properties with a timeline at the bottom. So let's go into this one. We will open this image in a new tab and we will go over to, where is it? Right here. So this is more of what I kind of wanted to show you guys before. So this allows you to take a look at 2 different options and set the keyframes between them. You can keyframe a lot more than just 2 though, but it will only allow you to see 2 at a time. So, which is fine, I guess. I mean, like, that's still pretty good that they even gave us this option. But as you can see, there's a bunch of different graphs on position, but you can only have one kind of selected at a time to adjust. So we're looking at one keyframe here, but we can see all the graphs in position. If there was more settings in shadows, I'm sure we could see all the graphs in those. But as you can see, they are adjusting the keyframes in all of these. So we can capture a keyframe for the cinematic camera and these little dots keyframes, and you can make the adjustments on those specific keyframes. So if you're making an adjustment, I don't know if it'll auto detect a keyframe. A lot of times in professional softwares like Adobe, for example, you can make the keyframes will automatically pop up if you make an adjustment. I don't know if that's how it'll work, but essentially if you're making an adjustment on anywhere you've placed a keyframe, so if you place a keyframe right here, you put your little arrow thing that you have down here on that, you make the adjustment, it'll adjust the keyframe. So or for example, if you want to change the starting frame, you just put the timeline indicator right there, and then boom, there you go. That's how you make your adjustment. That's how that works. Next here we have, at the top of the UI, you'll find general tools giving you basic controls of the cinematic camera, play and pause, take you through the cinematic you have created, while save lets you keep the setup for another time, and reset gives you a fresh start when needed. Lastly, the segment duration slider enables you to specify the duration of playback from 1 to 120 seconds. So your cinematic shots can go anywhere between 1 second to 120 seconds. So that's a pretty long cinematic shot that you can set up, which is really cool. A playback consists of points called keys. I've been calling them keyframes. That's what they even called it in the game, but they're usually refer to them as keyframes. Sometimes people will say it's keying as well. Typically, each point has a different camera position in the cinematic camera, and the cinematic comes together as the camera transitions between these points. Each point can also have different photo mode properties connected to it, allowing you to, for example, change the time of day or weather during your cinematic, which, as I've explained before, you can actually have it transition between different types of weather and put fog on and stuff like that, like have fog roll into your city. Gosh, so cool. The first graph is the camera transform controls, which control the position and rotation of the camera. The capture key button on the right will add the camera's current position and rotation to the controls, which can always be adjusted. The drop down lets you switch between the two, and properties listed next to the drop down menu can be selected, allowing you to change each of them. As you add additional keys to the timeline with different positions and rotations, you can adjust the transition between these by selecting the key and adjusting the graph. Lastly, keys can be deleted by selecting them using the delete key on the right. Hopefully you can just use the delete key on your keyboard. That would be really nice. One thing they didn't show off was any kind of like adjustments to the scale of it, because when you think about, if we open this one up, when you think about, if you look at this line, right? This is a very harsh line. So it's just straight shot down to this. And then like, let's say we don't want this to just hard hit whatever position this is, and we want it to be smooth. That would be what we call an easy ease. I know you can do that because I saw Imperator show that off in their video. I don't know how it works or how to get to it. I don't know if you have to, like, that's what they're explaining here. Like, you click on it and then you can, like, you get the little dragger things that you drag around and then make it slope kind of to make it smooth out. Because that's usually how things would, when you do professional video production. Like when you guys see my camera kind of zoom in and out, I'll show you guys right now in Adobe. So if we watch my camera move right now, that was a hard movement, right? So I didn't add any kind of smoothing to it. So I'll put my camera back. And then now let's see what it looks like when it's smooth. And so hopefully you guys can see the difference there between the different types. And I'm curious how you would smooth that motion in this, because I know you can do it. I saw Imperator have settings for it, but I don't know how to activate it, is essentially what it is. So something I'm looking forward to. A little further down, you'll find the photo mode panel. Here you can add keys for all the properties we discussed earlier in photo mode and create transitions between them. To get started, find the settings you want to add in the panel on the right and click the capture frame for cinematic camera. This allows you to add new keys in a similar way to the camera transition or camera transform controls, and the drop down allows you to switch between the settings that you have added. You only need to add options you want to transition between, such as the time of day or focal length. any photo mode settings you have adjusted but have not added to the cinematic camera, so that you haven't added a keyframe for, basically, are applied to the entire playback. So for example, if you set all these keyframes for your position, but you don't set a keyframe for weather, and you change the weather setting, it will be over the entirety of your playback. But if you set 2 keyframes for your weather and you adjust one of the keyframes, then it'll transition the weather. That makes sense. So that's pretty much it on the cinematic camera. I know this might have been like me kind of yapping on, and you might have been bored or whatever, but I genuinely think that this is going to be one of the features that you as a general user might not use, you might not see, you might not embrace, but I guarantee you, if you watch any regular City Skylines content or City Skylines creator, they are going to be absolutely ecstatic once they kind of figure out how to utilize these features properly, because let me tell you, this is an absolute game changer for City Skylines content creators. One of the biggest things they could possibly have added to this game for people who make content for this. So I want to thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. If you guys enjoyed or have any questions, let me know down below. Again, this is video production is my job, is what I went to school for. It's what I know. So if you guys have any questions on any of this, or what certain features do, or have better ways to explain certain stuff, let me know down in the comments. I tried to explain it as simply as possible, as best as I possibly could. I also feel a little frazzled today, so hopefully I nailed it. If I didn't, we'll clarify stuff in the comments. So I want to thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. I will check you guys out for the last Dev Insight on Thursday. Hopefully the devs give us some really cool insights. I really liked last week's video on the sound designer for the game, so hopefully we get to see more of that kind of stuff. Anyways, I'll catch you in the next one. Deuces.